Greetings to my fellow peace blunderers, and today I'm covering yet another endgame that is arguably the most important one in all of chess, and that is the Philidor Endgame. This endgame teaches us how to salvage invaluable draws in rook and king versus rook and king and pawn positions, as the side that is defending, as the side with the pawn viewer. Now, if you, my dear viewer, could somehow come back to all of the games that you've ever had in your career in these kind of positions, rook and king versus rook and king and pawn with a pawn viewer, and check how many games you've lost amongst those that you could have actually drawn, you'd be shocked. A lot of beginner to intermediate players, when they are a pawn down in the endgame, they just lose their pants. They think, well, I have less material, thus I guess I'm losing. And that is so not the case, especially when we're talking about rook endgames. After all, there is the famous chess adage that goes, all rook endgames are drawn. Remember about that. So let's learn together how to consistently turn 0-point games into 0.5 games in about 10 minutes or however long this video is going to last. One small thing before we start, in this video I'm covering only the basics for the Philidor endgame because this endgame is not the most straightforward and there are a lot of nuances to it. So if you want me to cover some of the more advanced stuff, please let me know. I'll do it in the next video. All right, let's talk Philidor. What you're seeing right now is one typical example of the Philidor positions, and there are so many. For example, this is one configuration that is possible. This is also a Philidor position. This is also a Philidor position. There are countless amounts of it. And since there are so many variations, the question is, how do we tell whether that's a Philidor position or not? Well, the main characteristics of a Philidor position are the following. First of all, one side has to have an extra pawn. Obviously, in this case, it's the pawn on e5, which is trying to promote. This pawn is usually going to be well defended, sometimes just by the king. In this case, it's the king on d5. Sometimes it's going to be defended by the king and the rook also at the same time. In this case, it's the rook on e1. Also, the king of the attacking side, in this case the white king, is not supposed to be beyond the pawn. So not beyond the 5th rank. And from black's perspective, what we need to achieve the Philidor are a well-placed king and a well-placed rook. And what these are, I'm about to explain. When it comes to a well-placed king, I'd like to show you guys a small trick. Look at this position as it is right now and allow me to do a small switcheroo. Look at this position right now. I removed both rooks, and if you know a little bit about basic endgames, you will instantly recognize that this position, regardless of whose move this is a draw. And by the way, if you don't know why this position is a draw, I highly recommend you to check out my King and Pawn Endgames Explained video. It's going to be very useful. But yeah, when trying to identify whether the position is a Philidor or not, it's usually a good idea to just mentally get the rooks off the board and just look at the kings and the pawn like this. If the structure reminds you anything of a drawn king and pawn endgame, you are usually in a good place. And in the case of a well-placed rook, it's going to be slightly more complicated. You see, depending on the kind of Philidor that you've got, the definitions of a well-placed rook are going to be different. But what I can tell you for sure is that you must be very happy when you can safely and easily transfer your rook to the 6th rank, because the 6th rank defense is a crucial element of the Philidor. And secondly, well, in this position, our king and our rook are kind of lined up. And in this very position is just about okay, but you should always watch out when this happens, because if the white rook at any point manages to skewer your king and your rook, which are on the same rank, it can be very bad for you. If we imagine a situation where, let me play just a couple of nothing moves, just another nothing move, and then the rook arrives at b7, skewering the king and the rook, we are basically forced to go to f8 with our king. That's the only way not to lose the rook for nothing. Rook takes, and now white very easily finishes the game off with basically almost any move they can play. e6 is winning, king d6 is winning. So you've got to be careful when placing your rook and king on the same rank, okay? And yeah, guys, don't worry if you are still a little bit confused as to what makes a Philidor, because these things, they can be quite tricky. It just takes a bit of experience, time to get used to those, and to be able to spot them immediately. It's okay. To make you feel better, I have two interesting positions to show you very quickly. For example, this position with white to move is a win for white. Whereas this position, identical. I just moved the rook from a7 to h7, still with white to move, is a draw for black. And this just goes to show how confusing these rook versus rook and pawn positions can be. This is, well, technically a Philidor, whereas this one is not. But yeah, enough is enough. Let's get to the good stuff. How do we bloody draw this? And let's be generous. Let's give white a move. Why not? Let's see what white can do in this position. First of all, pushing the pawn is not recommended. Every time white pushes a pawn to the 6th rank, when the king is not on the 6th rank, the king is behind the pawn, we should be very happy. But I'll get into that a bit later. The most active move that the white can probably do is something like rook to a1. With a very simple idea, the rook doesn't have to defend the pawn anymore. The rook can slide in and threaten that skewer that I was just showing you earlier. And now, again, something that I was referring to, a 6th rank defense with rook to g6. And this is very important. When the 6th rank is available to us, we must make use of that. We occupy these squares with our rook, and we are basically making it difficult for white to get the pawn there, or to get the king there. Now, white is going to deliver a check on a7, which makes a lot of sense. All of these squares are unavailable to our king, thus the king is forced back on the 8th rank. However, we mustn't worry, it's okay. Now, any further checks are not going to achieve anything. For example, rook a8 check, we just come back to e7. Another check comes back to e8. This can cause a repetition. If white doesn't want to allow repetition, there has to be a change of tactic. But what is white supposed to do? Okay, checks don't really work, do they? The king cannot go forward because of our brilliant rook on the 6th rank. And if the king tries to do some tricks, we just completely ignore it and we retain the rook on the 6th rank. After something like king e4, we go rook h6, we don't need to do anything, we're just playing for a draw. The king can go to f5 and we can go to c6. The bottom line is the same, the king cannot physically penetrate. And let's go back a little. If white decides to be very smart and he's like, okay, so you are controlling the 6th rank. Well, how about I take it away from you? I'm going to play rook c1, for example, with an idea of playing a rook c6. I'm going to contest that 6th rank. We're like, okay, that's not a big deal. We're still maintaining our rook on the 6th rank. And now, if they want to follow up with a plan of rook c6, we can just very easily take that rook. We can very easily take that rook because after king takes on c6, we go king e7. And this is a very easy king and pawn endgame draw. King d5. And this is a position that is very familiar to us. I showed that at the beginning of the video right here, and I claimed that this is a draw, and this is indeed a draw. So at the end of the day, after rook a7 check, king e8, the only remaining course of action which looks like progress, at least, is pushing the pawn forward with e6. And this is the moment where we as black are rubbing our hands. As soon as the pawn reaches the 6th rank, all we have to do as black now is to slide the rook as far back as possible to something like a g1 and start delivering check after check after check after check. Look at that king on d5. It's completely exposed and it's got nowhere to hide. Any checks from white's perspective, again, are not going to achieve anything. Rook a8 check, we just go to e7, rook a7 check, king a8. It doesn't really matter. And if white decides to step forward with their king to a square like d6, it's not going to help. Rook d1 check, and here we go. King c5, rook c1 check, king d4. Of course, the white is very likely to try and push their king towards your rook so that the checks are no longer possible with something like rook d1 check, king c5, okay, goes back for a little, Rook c1, king d4, rook d1 check, king c3 finally, rook c1 check, king d2. And now the king is attacking our rook, and yeah, all possible checks are eliminated. But now look where the king turned out to be. It was all the way on d6, and now it's as far back as d2. And as you may have noticed, the king on d2 is not doing a very good job of protecting that pawn on e6. So what we're doing is we're simply sliding our rook to c6, attacking that pawn, and it's going to be a very easy draw. This pawn is now unsavable no matter what you do. You can try and temporarily save it with something like e7. At least on e7, this pawn is protected by the rook, but it's quite obvious to see that after rook e6, we're adding an extra attacker onto that pawn, and it's game over. This pawn is attacked twice and defended only once. The pawn is about to fall. Rook a8 check, king takes on e7, and white has got no tricks. Rook a7 check, king just goes to somewhere like e8. It doesn't matter, it's a draw. So just to recap, the two key factors here are putting your rook on the 6th rank, so it's not allowing your opponent's king to go any more forward, and second of all, when after a couple of moves we just remain patient, we do nothing, we keep the rook on the 6th rank, and when the pawn travels to that 6th rank, we finally free our rook and allow it to go back, well, as far back as the 1st rank. It's the most solid option, just something like rook g1, and we start delivering endless checks to the opponent's king. Now, sometimes there are positions when your opponent is controlling the 6th rank, and you may be like, bloody hell, how am I supposed to defend that? Without the 6th rank, it's probably game over. However, it may just be okay. For example, in this position, we can just play rook d8 check. The king will probably hide behind a pawn, king e4, and we're using the same tactic of getting the rook as far back as we can and start delivering as many checks as possible with something like rook d1. And looking at this, there aren't any feasible ways for white to make any progress whatsoever. King f5, or sorry, not king f5 for example, king f5 now. King f5, we just, again, delivering checks. Rook f1 check, king e4, rook e1 check, king f3, rook f1 check, king e2, and again, king is attacking rook, no more checks. The same thing that we saw in the previous position, just rook f5, attacking that pawn that is undefended, and the pawn is about to get captured in a couple of moves. Going back to that position where I incidentally played rook e7 check, which is another way of white to try and achieve progress right here, well, we just go back to e6 with the king, and it's basically a position that is stuck. Rook a6 check, we just repeat, king e7, rook a7 check. I can even, just for fun, get our king onto the 8th rank and give a white a chance, give him a chance. And king f5 may probably follow rook h1, and with rook h1, and with the white rook no longer being on the 6th rank, but now being on the 7th, you can probably see where this is going. Because king e6 is not going to help. It seems like it prepares the mate in 1, but we're just going to, first of all, get the king away from that square with rook h6 check. And after king d5, this position becomes very, very, very familiar to us, right? We have the rook on the 6th rank. We have our opponent rook on the 7th, but it does literally nothing. And the pawn and the king are stuck on the 5th. If white wants to get any progress done, they may push the pawn at some point to the 6th rank, and we're going to do the same routine, rook h1, and then just check, 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 check all the time. And finally, remember that not all Philidors are created equal. We've so far been looking at positions with the white king and the white pawn on a 5th rank. However, with them being on the 4th rank, this is still a Philidor and this is still a draw. We have a very good king, we have a very good rook, and it's basically the same shtick. If white plays this position correctly, well, there's not much the white can do, but if white plays it correctly and we play it correctly, all this position ends up being is developing into a Philidor that we've seen before. The pawn will get pushed forward, the king will get pushed forward, and they will end up on the 5th rank and eventually on the 6th rank, and we will draw. For example, in this position, white can try and take over the 6th rank that very, very valuable 6th rank with something like rook b6. Well, that's fine. We just go king c7. The rook is attacked, but white's like, okay, I'm going to stay on a 6th rank because it's so important. And we're like, okay, we're not going to do much either. King d7, just getting closer to the king and to the pawn, preparing to defend. White's like, oh boy, I'm going to push e5. We're like, okay, fine. King e7, trying to oppose the pawn, as we should. And now something like rook a6. Maybe white can try and play for tricks. Maybe white can try and skewer. We are just going to be very calm and cool about it. We can just get the rook away from that dangerous 7th rank. Remember not to line up your king and rook. That could be very, very costly. We just go rook h1, for example. Since we can't take over the 6th rank, remember that we can always go behind and start doing some checks. Rook a7 check. Not going to do much for white. King e6, we're just going forward. Rook a6 check, just going to cause repetition. King e7 and king d5 as one of the last attempts to achieve any progress. And again, this position is becoming more and more familiar to us. The king and the pawn are on the 5th ranks now, and this is going to develop just like you think it will. Just rook d1, and now we're just starting to deliver check after check after check. So check, 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 check. And the king is attacking our rook, and now we can very easily go to rook d5. And again, similar situation. This position is a draw. The pawn is about to get captured very soon. So yeah, let me know in the comments what you think of this video. If you just so happens to find this useful, please like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitch. I stream Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. Find me on chess.com. Join our Discord. All that good stuff. And I'm going to talk to you very soon. My favorite unintentional gambiters. Love you all. See ya in the next one.